Okay, you ready, Romulo?
Yep.
You know, I was very concerned when I heard that in San Antonio or Dallas somewhere this year, they didn't want to let drag queens in the gay pride parade. Now, obviously you're a sensible audience that enjoys fine female impersonation. But obviously some people, even within the gay movement, our own sisters are going to be against it. So I've composed this little poem set to music to address that subject entitled, I live the life I love, and I love the life that I live. Now, just because you see me walk around in these store-bought curls, this is a wig. Everybody knows goddamn well that I ain't no real girl. But what have any of you got to take? And what have any of you got to give? As long as I live the life that I love. And baby, let me tell you, I love the life that I live.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. And thank you for coming to our walking tour of our East Village neighborhood and some of its artists and writers. We were just watching a short clip of Wigstock, 1989, in Tompkins Square Park with the fabulous Lady Bunny, who started the Wigstock Festival in 1984, when a group of the Pyramid Club's drag queens started a spontaneous drag show in Tompkins Square Park. And you can hear Lady Bunny talk a little bit about the inception of that festival in the 1995 Wigstock documentary. My name is Corinne Neary. I am the library manager of Tompkins Square Library, and I'm here doing this tour, as always, with my partner.
Hi, I'm Michael Paul from the East Village at 14th Street, resident for 30 years. I love volunteering with the New York Public Library, especially during this time of COVID. We're all in this together at home, and I hope you enjoy the way we are programming to reach everybody into their homes with this wonderful history of artists and poets of the East Village.
Before we get started, we always like to say a couple of things. First of all, we used to do these tours in person, and some of you may have come on one of our tours or maybe more. We've missed doing them a lot, and we recently decided to try doing them online. It's a little bit different, but we are having fun with it, and we don't claim to be experts. We do these tours for fun because we like learning about the neighborhood we love, and we love connecting with other people in the community. We are not going to be able to talk about all of the artists you might know from this neighborhood because there are so many. We've chosen a few to highlight today, and we hope you enjoy what we do talk about, and maybe you'll learn something new. And if you could, as we go along, just keep yourselves muted. When we get to the end, we'll have plenty of time if anyone would like to add a comment, ask a question. We might not know the answers to your questions, but we'd love to hear them anyway. And someone else who's here today might know the answer to your question. So please do speak up at the end if you would like to make a comment. And we want to give a quick thanks to our neighbors and friends at Village Preservation, who always help us a lot with these tours, and also the New York Public Library databases, from which we get a lot of information. So let's begin. Starting as always at the Tompkins Square Library at 331 East 10th Street. This is where I work and where many of you come to get your books and attend programs when we are doing those in person again. Here you can see the library, which opened on December 1st, 1904. This picture was taken just around that time. This is a Carnegie Library, one of 67 Carnegie libraries in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And this picture, which was taken right around that time, of children lining up to get into the building, there was a child who could have been lining up, and maybe could even be in this picture, someone who you might not have heard of, but who you certainly are familiar with his work. If you haven't noticed it before, next time you do come into our building to the first floor reading room, please take a look on the wall, and you'll see that the room is dedicated to Yip Harburg, who was a lyricist. He wrote the lyrics to over 600 songs, most famously all of the lyrics in the 1939 movie, The Wizard of Oz, including the song Over the Rainbow, which is considered one of the most well-known songs of the 20th century. His son, Ernie Harburg, told us that Yip was at a very early age interested in poetry, and he used to come to the Tompkins Square Library to read. He became very friendly with the librarians, and they fed him all of the English poets who he was hooked on. And he later credited the librarians working here at the time for his interest in writing. Yip attended PS 64 in the neighborhood, and in elementary school, he started writing parodies of the songs of the day and wrote and performed in shows at school and at the Henry Street settlement. While he was attending Townsend Harris High School, he earned money lighting street lamps at dusk and getting up at 3 a.m. to turn them off again. Townsend High School, which was associated with City College, where he later attended, Yip was seated in alphabetical order next to Ira Gershwin, who also lived in the neighborhood. After school, Yip would go over to Ira Gershwin's home, which was on 2nd Avenue and 5th Street, and was considered a wealthier area. Yip lived at 11th and C, and he really lived in complete poverty. But at the Gershwins, they had a Victrola, and they would go and listen to music, including the libretto to the HMS Pinafore, the opera, with music by Arthur Sullivan, and the libretto by W.S. Gilbert. To stave off boredom in school, they also started their own column, dubbed the Daily Passet, where they printed poems and cartoons on toilet paper and circuited them around among their fellow students. Yip was briefly the co-owner of an electrical appliance company that went bankrupt after the Great Depression began, and that pushed him back into writing and music. In 1932, Yip, along with the composer Jay Gorney, penned what is considered the anthem of the Great Depression, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, which is part of the 1932 musical Americana. That song was sung by Bing Crosby and some other well-known singers. It became a big radio hit. And that gave Yip a lot of renown. As you can see, this was written about him in the New York Times in 1933. And that is what enabled him to start working in Hollywood. Working in Hollywood with composer Harold Arlen, Yip wrote the lyrics to the entire score of The Wizard of Oz. And he actually had a huge impact on how we think of the movie today. Because the idea of the rainbow, as we know the song Over the Rainbow was not initially a concept in L. Frank Baum's book, The Wizard of Oz. Yip is the one who came up with that idea. They knew that Judy Garland would sing a ballad in the opening sequence in The Colorless World of Kansas. And so Yip gave Arlen a working title for the song and a mood. The working title was, I Want to Get to the Other Side of the Rainbow. After World War II, Yip was blacklisted because of his political views, but he wrote, I didn't mind. I think I'm a rebel by birth. I contest anything that is unjust, that causes suffering for humanity. My feeling about that is so great that I don't think I could live with myself if I weren't honest. Hollywood's blacklisting brought him to Broadway, where he wrote Finian's Rainbow with Burton Lane. Yip was killed in a car accident in Los Angeles in 1981, a few days before he was scheduled to return to New York to receive the Johnny Mercer Award from the Songwriters Hall of Fame. In 1995, he was commemorated on the U.S. Postal Service stamp. And in May 1996, there was a reopening ceremony here at Tompkins Square Library after the building was renovated. Among the guests were his son, Ernie Harburg, and his 10-year-old grandson, Ben Harburg, who sang along with a chorus of school children to start the proceedings Over the Rainbow. Yip's son said at the time, he would have been thrilled to the bottom of his soul about the naming of the reading room. This place was where he came out of the cold and into the warmth and dared to dream of becoming an artist. Now we're going to go down to 222 Bowery. I'm going to hand this one over to Michael Paul.
Thank you. And I must say, Fred Astaire's last musical was Finian's Rainbow. I saw it. Thank you. So this is where 222 Bowery, we're going to speak about John Giorno. If there was a spiritual shrine in New York City devoted to the downtown art and literary worlds of the past half century, it existed in a building below Houston Street on the Bowery, in the 3 lofts owned by poet, performer, painter, and legend John Giorno. Giorno lived in the building for almost 5 decades and divided his life among its floors. one for writing, one for painting, and the third, The Bunker, which originally was home to his longtime friend William S. Burroughs, for, among other life-sustaining acts, dinners, and occasional Buddhist prayer ceremonies when Giorno's teachers and friends traveled from Asia. It is striking that for a man who had lived for so long in one place, Giorno's prolific productions were so centered on movement, whether it was his marathon poems full of insights and incidental reflections and mantra-like phrases that he regularly performed, or his word paintings or fragmentary texts, such as Just Say No to Family Values in 2009. His work refuses to stand still. They swirl and build and cultivate in their constant cultural rotation. Giorno had not only been a New York resident for most of his life, he was also a key artist and social lightning rod. He moved to the city from his childhood home in Long Island to attend Columbia University in the 1950s and eventually headed downtown. He became embroiled and involved with Andy Warhol during his early experiments with Warhol during his early experiments with film. You can see Giorno as the star of Warhol's iconic black and white 1963 movie Sleep, in which he appeared as a handsome nude young man sleeping from various vantage points for the film's entire 5-hour run. Giorno was also friend and sometimes lover of artists Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns, and it was these creative experimenters of post-abstraction and pop, unlike the New York School of Poetry with its absorption of abstract expressionism, that influenced Giorno's poetic trials, a found style pulled from the streets, enacting the language and politics of the time, but also a very revolutionary interest in the means of delivery for poems, using new technologies to bring art to the listener. So began Giorno Poetry Systems, a nonprofit foundation committed to opening unexplored channels. Giorno began developing sound pieces in 1965 through his introduction to William Burroughs. Giorno famously wrote a poem called Subway, and was encouraged to record sounds in the actual subway, creating a composition out of environmental audio and instigating Giorno's career in audio arts. In 1968, Giorno started his ongoing Dial a Poem series, where the public could dial a number and hear poems recorded by the likes of John Ashbery, Allen Ginsberg, and Jim Carroll. You can listen to his Dial a Poems on YouTube, which is very interesting. Dial a Poem was exhibited in MoMA in 1970. Giorno's interest in the frontiers of technology continued through the 70s, 80s, and 90s as Giorno Poetry Systems released more than 50 albums of poetry and music, melding collaborators as diverse as Laurie Anderson, Gregory Corso, Patti Smith, Karen Finley, Husker Du, Ann Waldman, Richard Hell, Philip Glass, and of course, Burroughs. The catalogs for the records are like zines with cartoons, short stories, and photographs. In the 80s and 90s, much of the money earned by Giorno Poetry Systems went to Giorno's own community-minded AIDS treatment project. In 98, Giorno met his partner, the Swiss multimedia artist Hugo Rodinon, who transitioned Giorno into another area of his career and into the folds of the current visual art world. Here is a beautiful photograph taken by East Village photographer Ross Bennett Lewis of Giorno with outstretched hand. Thank you.
I was muted. We're going to go back uptown to St. Mark's Place to 57 St. Mark's. This building was built in 1850 as a single family home. By the 1920s, it was a social club called the Mansion. And by the middle of the 20th century, it became the Holy Cross Polish National Catholic Church. From 1978 to 1983, the basement of the church was transformed into Club 57. Managed by performance artist Ann Magnuson, it became known for its theme nights, performance art, and live music. New York Magazine wrote, "Sets were crafted out of cardboard boxes and furniture plucked off East Village curbs and tossed out yet again immediately after the show. Props came from thrift stores and often went back the next day. Magnuson described it as a punk do-it-yourself aesthetic." One night in 1979, Keith Haring and fellow School of Visual Arts classmates Kenny Scharf and John McLaughlin, who you can see here, known as John Sex, finished drinks at the nearby Holiday Cocktail Lounge at 75 St. Mark's Place and stumbled into Club 57 after hearing 60s go-go music blasting inside. Keith Haring, who then became a Club 57 regular, held one of his first New York City exhibitions here in 1980. That same year, he also exhibited at Performance Space 122, and around that same time at West Beth in the West Village. At Club 57, Haring was known for his poems read in Morse code from within a fake television set. SVA students were a big part of the crowd at Club 57, and the crowd also included Jean-Michel Basquiat, Kathy Acker, Joey Arias, Ethel Eichenberger, Chris Kraus, Augusto Mikado, Tom Murren, Fab Five Freddy, Kenny Scharf, Mark Shaman, Sir Rodney, John Sex, and David Wychanovitz. Michael, help me out with that one. Wynarovich, who we're going to talk about a little bit more later. These flyers you can see here are from the Fales Library Archive at NYU. We visited there a couple of years ago, and they have a huge amount of material related to these downtown club flyers, including Club 57 and the Pyramid Club, among many others. Kenny Scharf said that at Club 57, there were drugs and promiscuity. It was one big orgy family. Sometimes I look around and say, oh my God, I've had sex with everybody in this room. It was just the spirit of the times, and it was before AIDS. Jean-Michel Basquiat said that aesthetically, I really hated Club 57. I thought it was silly. All this old and bad shit. I'd rather see something old and good. Basquiat died of a heroin overdose in 1988. Years before that, when he was a teenager, he had run away from home and slept on the benches of Tompkins Square Park, later returning to move into the abandoned building on East 12th Street. Club 57 closed in 1983, but the parties and performances continued in other equally legendary East Village spots like the Pyramid Club and King Tut's Wawa Hut, until AIDS descended and carried off so many of the artists who had given the scene its energy. Ann Magnuson wrote, "None of us could have predicted we'd experience such soul-sickening sadness while still so young." Keith Haring died from AIDS in 1990. In 2017 to 2018, MoMA hosted a big Club 57 exhibition, which maybe some of you got to see. And in the write-up for that exhibit, they said, a center of creative activity in the East Village, Club 57 is said to have influenced virtually every club that came in its wake. Now we're going to move down to another club, The World, 254 East 2nd Street.
Thank you, Corinne. Dean Johnson, very visual artist, was the driving force behind the groundbreaking rock and roll fad bar parties held Tuesday nights in the late 80s at the World. Dean Johnson was a cross-dressing musician, party promoter, and prominent figure in the nightlife scene of the New York City's club nightlife in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Known for his towering height, shaved head, giant sunglasses, and penchant for wearing short cocktail dresses that exaggerated the length of his pale-lit figure, Johnson played a seminal role in the emergence of the queercore gay rock and roll subculture in the East Village. Both an underground rock star and a porn star, Dean Johnson fronted two bands, Dean and the Weenies and the Velvet Mafia. He partied with art world luminaries like Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Andy Warhol, and performed at nightclubs such as Area, Danceteria, the Cat Club, and Pyramid. He subsequently produced the monthly homocore live music showcases at CBGB, which featured gay and transgender rock and roll bands. Johnson grappled with drug addiction and was a sex worker. He died at age 46 from an apparent drug overdose while working in a Washington, D.C. apartment. There was some suspicion around his death stemming from the fact that another man had died with the same John 2 days prior. And now we've got a gritty live video of Dean Johnson's band, the Velvet Mafia.
Rich man, fake tan, hair club for men. I want fame, I want a name, I want to be your boyfriend. tell by my stare. Dirty, I can tell by your underwear that you're kinda dirty. You have it eyes and your breath is busted. I close my eyes. This is how it must be. If you wanna cross a bridge, you gotta make it even tall. If you wanna make it big, you gotta play with trolls. I go stepping at the fire running with David Jumping. Out of my way, there's gone nowhere about it. Around the Riviera with Cindy Allen. I'm feeling fine. Strolling down Madison Avenue, Calvin
Thank you, Michael. Now we're going to go to 77 St. Mark's Place, just down the block from where we were earlier at Club 57. This is a tenement building built in 1845. Originally, it was a 3.5-story house and later expanded to 4 stories. Around 1916 and 1917, the Marxist revolutionary Leon Trotsky wrote in this building for the Moscow publication, The New World. Some years after that, British poet W.H. Auden moved to New York in 1939 and lived in a series of apartments before, in 1953, in search of a homier nest, he moved into the second-floor apartment of 77 St. Mark's Place with his writing partner, lover, domestic partner, Chester Kallman. Auden and Kallman spent their summers in Europe, mostly, and their winters in New York City. Auden called the apartment on the second floor of 77 St. Mark's his New York nest. Auden would remain here until the year before his death in 1972. At times, the apartment was so cold that the water no longer functioned and he had to use the toilet in the liquor store at the corner, which wasn't a huge problem for Auden, who was a legendary drinker and was also a regular at the next door Holiday Cocktail Lounge, where he held court with Allen Ginsberg and downed bottles of cognac. Stefan Lutak, the Holiday Cocktail Lounge's longtime owner, recalled the poet sifting through a street-side trash can one night. Auden explained that he was looking for a $30,000 check which someone had thrown away. Having no luck finding it, Auden came in for a drink, still reeking of garbage. He was a rich man, but sloppy, Lutak said. Oliver Sacks was an occasional visitor at Auden's apartment in the late 60s, and he wrote that it was best to visit his friend for tea, because by 4 o'clock he had finished the day's work, but had not yet started the evening's drinking. During one of Oliver Sacks's visits, Auden explained to him what he thought the difference was between an alcoholic and a drunk. He said, an alcoholic has a personality change after a drink or two, but a drunk can drink as much as he wants. Fellow artists visited often in his apartment. According to an article from the New York Times, they included T.S. Eliot, Igor Stravinsky, Allen Ginsberg, Hannah Arendt, Robert Graves, Marianne Moore, Christopher Isherwood, and Oliver Sacks, not to mention plenty of gay sailors, practitioners of rough trade, alcoholics, drug addicts, and thieves. The apartment was forever being robbed. In that latter sense, at least, Auden belonged. He is the dirtiest man I have ever liked, said Igor Stravinsky of Auden. The Paris Review wrote that although he lived in complete chaos, he ran to a strict daily timetable. He could work for 8 or 10 hours with a half an hour off for lunch. There was then an open house hour at 4, which students and admirers might attend. There was always a cocktail hour at 5 o'clock, and dinner had to be served exactly at 6. He never worked in the evening. Only the Hitlers of this world work at night. No honest artist does, he said. He was also a faithful parishioner of St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. I found this letter on E.B. Grieve, which I thought was funny. It's written to Father Allen, who worked at the church at the time. And the letter starts off, "Have you gone stark raving mad?" The letter is a complaint about what he thinks is the church being too loose, basically, with the scripture that they're reading. Later on in the letter, he writes, "I implore you by the bowels of Christ, to stick to King James. Edmund Wilson thought that Auden deliberately goes in for uncomfortable, sordid, and grotesque lodgings, and that he had condemned himself to this, so far as I can see, for all the rest of his life. But Auden wrote, "I hate living in squalor. I detest it, but I can't do the work I want to do and live any other way." In 1972, Auden penned a goodbye op-ed in the New York Times on the eve of his departure for Christ Church College in Oxford. In it, he wrote, "New York is not simply a metropolis. It is also a city of neighborhoods, and I consider myself extremely fortunate in the one where I have lived for the past 20 years." And the Times wrote in that same issue, "Trotsky printed The New World in the basement of the St. Mark's Place house, and a lawyer on the ground floor translated Alice in Wonderland into Ukrainian. But the neighborhood has changed. A delicatessen around the corner that sold kippers is now a shrine to the macrobiotic enthusiasm, and Mr. Auden does not worship at that altar." Auden died the year after he left New York. He died in Austria in 1973. Michael, take us down to 86 East 3rd Street.
Thank you, Corinne. We'll talk next about Eileen Miles. Born on December 9th, 1949 in Boston, Massachusetts, Eileen Miles attended Catholic school in Arlington, Massachusetts, and earned their BA from the University of Massachusetts. In 1974, they joined the Poetry Project at St. Mark's. In 1979, Miles worked as an assistant to poet James Schuyler. Miles' first major collection, Not Me, was published in 1991. Miles is also the author of two novels, Inferno, a poet's novel, winner of the 2011 Lambda Literary Award. Miles also wrote the short story collection, Chelsea Girls, in 1994. They won an art writing grant from the Warhol Foundation for their collection of essays, The Importance of Being Iceland, in 2009, and received a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2012. Dennis Cooper describes Miles as one of the savviest and most restless intellects in contemporary literature. In the Boston Review, Kathleen Roney compares Miles' output to Willie Nelson's in how the poems enact a radical receptiveness to passing thoughts and experiences. In addition to writing poetry, Miles was the artistic director at St. Mark's Church from 1984 to 1987 and co-edited the anthology, The New Fuck You, Adventures in Lesbian Reading. Miles also wrote the libretto for the opera Hell by Michael Webster, which was performed on both coasts and in Tijuana. In 1991, Miles launched a write-in campaign for President of the United States. Miles has written about art, culture, and writing for a variety of publications, including Art Book Forum, The Believer, The Nation, and Parquet. Miles is a professor emeritus of writing and literature at University of California, San Diego, and currently teaches at NYU, Columbia University, and the Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado. And here's her actual writing campaign that she wrote herself in 1992 writing campaign. I quote Miles, "When you step in the booth on election day, do a write-in vote. I think it's like this big blank wall on the border. How do you do it? You illuminate it, you write in vote. Not Clinton, not Bush, not Perot, maybe me. You'll be alone in that booth and it's so dirty like a peephole or a dressing room or a confession. But they're really not so free until pen in hand, you pull the lever, you push the button. I believe it's red. And then on the upper left face of the voting booth, you spread the metal wings above the title, President. And an empty white space appears, empty as poetry. And this is your freedom of speech. Thanks for your friendship, love, and support, Eileen Miles." The writing campaign was so popular and known within the art community and with the public that artist, also a New York artist and photographer, Zoe Leonard wrote the piece, I Want to Dyke for President, which was exhibited as one of the art installations at Highline Park a few years ago. You can look up the actual piece by Zoe Leonard online on Google Images for the I Want to Dyke for President. It's a wonderful piece, very, very nicely done. Next, Corinne, is Allen Ginsberg. Okay. This is my Ginsberg. So, for more than 40 years, from 1952 until his death in 97, Allen Ginsberg, one of the most prolific writers of the Beat generation, lived and worked in the East Village. One of his pieces is called Fourth Floor Dawn, Up All Night Writing Letters by Allen Ginsberg, June 7th, 1980 at 6:48 a.m. Pigeons shake their wings on the copper church roof out my window across the street. A bird perched on the cross surveys the city's blue-gray clouds. Larry Rivers will come at 10 a.m. and take my picture. I'm taking your picture, pigeons. I'm writing you down, dawn. I'm immortalizing your exhaust, Avenue A bus. Oh, thought, now you'll have to think the same thing forever. This poem was penned by Ginsberg from his apartment at 437 East 12th Street between First Avenue and Avenue A, where he lived from 1975 to 1996. Directly across the street was the Roman Catholic Church of Mary, Help of Christians, with the copper roof described in this poem and referenced in other works by Ginsberg. It's hard to think of the East Village without reflecting on all of the counterculture, artistic, and social movements that took place here. Certainly the legacy of the Beat generation lives on in the spirit of the area, as well as its historic buildings, like the former Frank Stella studio at 128 East 13th Street, and the Anthology Film Archives, and the Pyramid Club at 101 Avenue A. As a poet, Ginsberg was a major part of the most important literary movements in the country, but is also known as a staunch advocate of free speech and an early proponent of sexual freedom and gay rights. Ginsberg and his fellow Beats, Jack Kerouac, Gary Corso, and William S. Burroughs, moved to the East Village in the early 1950s, and their experiences and adventures here were well documented, often through Ginsberg's own camera lens. And here he is at a pot rally. Very nice. Thank you.
Do you want to say a little bit about the Hare Krishna tree, Michael?
Oh my goodness, I've got to access my appendix. I'm sorry. Well, that's why I said it's Ginsbergy. So I apologize, people. As the story goes, on October 9th, 1966, the Hare Krishna mantra was chanted publicly for the first time outside of India, beginning the now popularized spiritual movement in the West. In Tompkins Square Park, underneath the now legendary Hare Krishna tree. The movement now considers the tree to be a sacred site. The event unfolded when Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, along with a group of robed followers, spent over 2 hours chanting, dancing, and playing tambourines and cymbals in the pursuit of Krishna, a Sanskrit term meaning pure and blissful consciousness. In the group was poet Allen Ginsberg, who lived close by at the time. Ginsberg later wrote of the event, the ecstasy of chant or mantra has replaced LSD and other drugs for many of the Swami's followers. You can see on a Bill Moyers clip on YouTube of Ginsberg actually chanting the Hare Krishna chant in the late 60s.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
We're talking about those two fabulous poets. I want to talk now about another poet who happens to be my favorite poet, Frank O'Hara, who was born in Baltimore in 1926, but he lived most of his adult life in New York City. And he lived at this apartment at 441 East 9th Street, right near the corner of Avenue A, from 1959 to 1963. He lived here much of that time with his partner, Joe Lasore. And when you walk by, you can see this plaque, which was put up by Village Preservation. Before moving to New York, Frank did serve a little bit in World War II. He then attended Harvard, and Edward Gorey was his roommate. Here you can see him in that apartment on 9th Street with an audience doing a reading. He wrote a number of poems inspired by his neighborhood around Tompkins Square. I just want to read a quick excerpt from a couple of those, which mention St. Brigid's Church on Avenue B, which Frank could see from the windows of his apartment looking across the park. The first is from Early on Sunday. How sad the Lower East Side is on Sunday morning in May, eating yellow eggs, eating St. Brigid's benediction, washing the world down with rye and Coca-Cola and the news, Joe stumbles home. Pots and pans crash to the floor. Everyone's happy again. And now an even shorter excerpt from his poem, Steps. How funny you are today, New York, like Ginger Rogers in Swing Time, and St. Brigid's steeple leaning a little to the left. Frank O'Hara was known as the poet among the painters because of his association with a group of New York artists, the Abstract Expressionists, with whom he collaborated for a number of years. Frank worked at MoMA as an assistant curator, and during that time working at MoMA, he curated or co-curated 19 exhibitions. He also wrote for Art News, and he wrote his book of poems, lunch poems, while on his lunch breaks in Midtown. As the painter Alex Katz remarked, Frank's business was being an active intellectual. O'Hara was also painted by many of the artists he worked with at MoMA. Here, Alex Katz, Larry Rivers, who read a eulogy for him at his funeral a few years later. O'Hara was also known as a live wire and someone who liked to party. Joe Lasore wrote, Frank had at various times both the desire and the determination to make out with the great majority of the people to whom he was attracted, their diversity being truly mind-boggling. Big guys, little guys, macho straight men, flagrantly gay men, rough trade, gay trade, friends, friends of friends, offspring of his friends, blondes, blacks, Jews, and women. Grace Hardigan, for example. Here you can see Frank with Vincent Warren, another partner of his, who was a dancer with the Metropolitan Ballet, and about whom Frank wrote what is possibly his most famous poem, Having a Coke with You, which we just want to play. It's about a minute and a half.
The poem's called Having a Coke with You. It's even more fun than going to San Sebastian, Irun, Onday, Biarritz, Bayonne, or being sick to my stomach on the Travesera de Gracia in Barcelona. Partly because in your orange shirt you look like a better, happier St. Sebastian. Partly because of my love for you. Partly because of your love for yogurt. Partly because of the fluorescent orange tulips around the birches. Partly because of the secrecy our smiles take on before people and statuary. It is hard to believe when I'm with you that there can be anything as still, as solemn, as unpleasantly definitive as statuary, when right in front of it, in the warm New York 4 o'clock light. We are drifting back and forth between each other like a tree breathing through its spectacles. And the portrait show seems to have no faces in it at all, just paint. You suddenly wonder why in the world anyone ever did them. I look at you, and I would rather look at you than all the portraits in the world, except possibly for the Polish rider occasionally, and anyway it's in the Frick, which thank heavens you haven't gone to yet so we can go together the first time. And the fact that you move so beautifully more or less takes care of futurism, just as at home I never think of the nude descending a staircase, or at a rehearsal a single drawing of Leonardo or Michelangelo that used to wow me. And what good does all the research of the Impressionists do them, when they never got the right person to stand near the tree when the sun sank? Or for that matter, Marino Marini, when he didn't pick the rider as carefully as the horse. It seems they were all cheated of some marvelous experience, which is not going to go wasted on me, which is why I'm telling you about it. The poem's called Having a Coke with You.
Frank O'Hara tragically was killed in 1966, in July of 1966, at just the age of 40. He was hit by a taxi cab on Fire Island. Here you can see his funeral service on the right. And you can see the New York Times, when they wrote about his death, they put him first as a museum curator and as a poet, almost as a secondary thing. Now, of course, he's known very, very well for his poetry. This is a picture I took this summer. I visited his grave on Long Island on my 40th birthday, because that's just the strange things I like to do on my 40th birthday. But I noticed that people still visit his grave and leave bottles of Coca-Cola there as tribute. And it says, grace to be born and live as variously as possible. Now we're going over to 189 2nd Avenue for Michael, and this was the home of...
Thank you, Corinne. David Wojnarowicz was an American artist and AIDS activist. Throughout his career, he used painting, performance, film, and photography to draw attention to civil rights and gay identity within American popular culture. Many of Wojnarowicz's projects are drawn from his own life or from individuals he met during his travels. After dropping out of school, Wojnarowicz began hitchhiking across the United States before eventually settling in on the New York art scene. While living there with AIDS in the 1980s, he wrote of his art, "I'm in the throes of facing my own mortality and in attempting to communicate what I'm expressing or learning in order to try and help others. I'm effectively silenced. I am angry." He is perhaps best known for his black and white film, "A Fire in My Belly," which 18 years after his death sparked national controversy when the piece was exhibited in 2010 at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Protests were held by the Catholic League, which revived a conservative culture war, similar to the one that had surrounded photographer Robert Mapplethorpe decades earlier, and brought renewed interest in Wojnarowicz's life and work. Born on September 14, 1954 in Red Bank, New Jersey, he grew up partly in New York City when he returned in the late 70s and fell in with a group of East Village artists that included Nan Golden, Kiki Smith, and Peter Hujar, all of whose work explored on personal identity and in various ways. Wojnarowicz's work is in the collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York and the Walker Art Society Center in Minneapolis. The artist died of AIDS at the age of 37 on July 22nd, 1992 in New York City. One of the most popular culture pieces that crossed over to world culture is this famous photograph that U2 used on their 1992 single, One. One was released by U2 in 1992 as a benefit single with the band's royalties donated to AIDS research. The band felt that AIDS was the most pressing issue of the day. The cover of the single release is a photograph by Wojnarowicz depicting buffaloes falling off a cliff after being chased by Native American hunters. Wojnarowicz identifies himself and ourselves with the buffalo, pushed into the unknown by forces we cannot control or even understand. Thank you. Here we have the Christmas tree.
Yeah, before we wrap up, we just want to mention, of course, that December 1st was World AIDS Day, as it is every year. And so many of the artists that we discussed today, and so many others, which we did not discuss, so many people were lost to AIDS in that time in the late 80s and 90s. And this is a picture that we took a few years back at one of our walking tours in front of the holiday tree in Tompkins Square Park. Michael, do you want to tell us a little bit about the tree?
Yes, thanks to photographer and writer Stacy Joy for allowing me to speak some pieces from her post on the fabulous Evie Grieve website. Albert Fabosi first planted the much-loved Christmas tree in Tompkins Square Park in 1992 to honor and memorialize his partner, Glenn Barrett, as well as others who died of AIDS. The tree was 8 feet tall when he planted it. Today, the tree is well over 50 feet. This year would have been the 29th anniversary of the lighting ceremony and holiday event, but due to COVID restrictions, the event was canceled. People will still be able to enjoy the delightfully askew tree, which was decorated by the Parks Department and is now illuminated at dusk. Additionally, the tree's memorial plaque, which had been in place for almost 20 years, was stolen earlier this year at the beginning of the quarantine. There are efforts now currently to restore the plaque. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us and giving me the pleasure to share stories with you. I love the East Village. Any questions? I saw someone questioning about the Krishna tree.
Yeah, if anyone has a question or comment they want to make, if you want, you can unmute yourself and talk, or you can put something in the chat or raise your hand, whatever works for you.
Any artist you'd like to see next time?
I just have to tell you, I thought it was extraordinary. I just say it's such a wonderful, rich talk that you've given. I thank you all for it. I'm sorry the world isn't watching. It's so great. And I wish, I don't know if it were if any possibility it was taped.
Oh, yes, we are taping it, and we'll have it on our website later. And hi, Lucille.
Hi, it was really a joy.
I miss seeing you. So good to
hear you. I'm so excited again about this incredible area I live in, because there's still a little remnant of the richness I think it's the only area in the city I care about anymore, just about.
Thanks, Lucille.
I want to thank you. I learned so much I didn't know about a neighborhood I spent so much of my 20s and 30s in. I just wanted to add that John Giorno's claimed that Basquiat had AIDS and that the overdose was really suicide, but Giorno's word is not really entirely trustworthy. But that's something he would know, but again, he was known to lie.
No, I knew when he passed away, I was working at Fiorucci on 59th Street, and there was always that Andy Warhol culture. And when they said Basquiat passed, they said it was heroin. There was no.
Thank you, Nikki. And it's good to hear from you too. I've been seeing you at the branch also.
And thank you for all this. Maybe I'll see you this evening.
Oh yes. For everyone who doesn't know, we also have another program this evening at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, which we're doing in partnership with Village Preservation. It's a book discussion on gentrification and the community gardens in the Lower East Side. And I'll put the link for that in the chat box. If anyone else has another comment, you can do that while I'm finding the link.
Just wanted to say how much I enjoyed this program, and I love being reminded of how lucky I am to live in the East Village. I love this neighborhood and every new thing I learn. It's quite wonderful.
Thank you so much.
So
That's very
thank you.
kind of you.
I want to add, Corinne and Michael, you guys did a great job. And on the chat, a lot of people were commenting how much they were enjoying the tour. Great job, guys.
Thank you, Romola. I appreciate your help today too. Let me see, I'm just finding that link for tonight's program with the GVSHP Village Preservation. They always do wonderful events, and I think people would enjoy it if you're interested in the neighborhood. So give me 1 second. I want to put that into the chat. I'm not very technologically savvy, so sometimes it takes me a while.
I still use a rotary phone.
Yeah, I like a rotary phone too. Why not? Okay, I put the link for the Village Preservation tonight. That's at 6 o'clock Eastern. If you want to sign up for that, you can follow that link and they'll send you the Zoom. Oh, Ross Bennett Lewis, you have your hand raised. Hi, Ross.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I want to thank you for the tour. I've been on several of the walk-arounds, and I appreciate the details and information that you and Michael have put together and presented to us online, and I just want to thank you.
Thank you for coming, and I appreciate the kind words. Your photograph of John Giorno was great.
Oh yeah, John was great. I enjoyed doing that shoot with him. That was shot in 1994, I believe. So it goes back a few years. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think people are starting to filter out now. But again, thank you so much for coming and listening to us, and everyone's kind words. We appreciate it very much.
I especially like you in front of the beautiful red shoe.
This is my tribute to Judy Garland, you know, my absolute favorite. So
it looks so great. It's a great image here. It is really beautiful with you, very special, dark, rich color. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Lucille. We always have to highlight Judy when we can. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Corinne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.